Okay, so this will be a fairly quick tutorial, but it starts off from where we left off last time, where we created a terrain, added some little mountains to it, painted them different colors, added a first-person controller so that we could walk around in it. So here's where we are now. We can look around with the mouse, and we can walk through our mountains, and this is all great. So learning how to sculpt terrain and adding skyboxes and adding our player that we can walk through it is really cool, but it is kind of limiting. There's more things you can do with it. You can add trees and wind and that sort of stuff, which we'll do as well. But what I want to show you guys right now is how you can bring in assets that other people have created. And then later on we'll work on creating our own assets. But for now, I'll show you how to bring in assets that other people have created. And Unity makes this really easy because there is something called the Asset Store. So if you go to Window and Asset Store, it will pop up this Asset Store. And inside this window, if you haven't done this before, it probably asks you to create an account. It's okay, they don't send you spam or anything. You can use a regular email. And they don't ask for a credit card or any of that sort of stuff. But once you get in here, there's all sorts of cool stuff you can get. And some of it's free, like this one here, Survival Shooter. And some of it you have to pay for. Like this guy's 90 bucks. So there's all sorts of random prices and items and things like that that you can get from this store, and you can use all of it in your games. It's once you buy it, you can use it in as many games as you want. So it's really cool that you have all these assets here. So if you're not really good at creating assets, just come here and buy them and get moving on with your concepts. What I want to do is, just since we're kind of working with terrain, I want to add some rocks. So I'm going to search up here in the search for rocks and see what we come up with. There should be, maybe it's this. Rocks pack. Yeah, so here's this rocks pack, and this is something that that I downloaded before to use rocks. And it gives you a little bit of an idea over here of everything that you're going to get out of it. A lot of times we're going to have screenshots that show you what's in these packages before you actually either pay for them or bother to download them. It also will show you all the files that you're going to get, and sometimes they're textures, models, things like that. Other times they could contain scripts and code and all that sort of stuff. But what we're going to do is, I think since I've already used this thing before, I've got an import button right here. Yours might say download or purchase or something like that, but make sure the price here is free, and so we're just going to import it. And what this will do is bring it right into our project, and then we can use it inside of our Unity scene. So I'll just click import, and we'll overwrite. Let's import. And it gives us an option here if we want to import everything or just certain pieces of this package. We're just going to take it all, so I'll just hit import. And it'll take it a sec here to just bring in all the models and textures, and then we can start using these assets and placing them in our scene. Using this asset store makes it really simple to get your idea up and going very quickly. And, maybe they're just placeholders. Maybe you have other ideas for rocks or kind of clunky circular shaped objects that you want to use later. But at least it can be a placeholder asset within your scene, and you can start working on other things. And then later on, when you want to have your final graphics done, somebody else can be working on those if you're not really good at the graphics portion of it. Alright, so we're in, and I'm just going to click over here. And if you look what happened once we hit import, some of these packages are named better than others. This one's just happens to be named Meshes, and it shows up down here over in the lower left corner in our file browser. So here we have Meshes, and here's our different rocks, and there's all kinds of stuff. There's meshes, textures, materials, but then there's a prefab in each of these directories, and the prefab is what you want because that's the full package of everything that goes into making a particular asset. And so if you have a prefab available, use that one because that contains everything. And we'll get into how we build these things later on, but for now, if you have a prefab, just use it. And so we can just drag it right into our scene. There we go. And so now we have a big rock in our scene, and if we run, let's see, do we see that anywhere? There it is. Look at that big rock. Let's go check it out. Oh my gosh, this thing's huge. Whoa. But yeah, so pretty much without doing anything, we've got a big gigantic rock in our scene. We can't walk through it because it's actually solid. And we can see how the light reflects off of it differently as we go, around it. So this is a really big rock, and maybe we don't want something that big. And when you get these assets from the asset store, you can modify them to work, with what works best for whatever you're doing. And in this case, this thing is just huge. And so if we have our rock prefab selected over here on the left, we get all these options over here on the right, just like we do with terrain. And one of the ones that we have here is scale. And so this 1:1:1 is the ratio of the size in each of our axes. So front to back, left to right, up and down. And we can adjust these. So you can either just type in numbers in these little boxes, or if you hover your mouse over the letter, like hover it over the X on scale, and I don't think this is showing up in the capture, but if you hover your mouse over the blue X that's on the recording, and then you click and you go move your mouse left and right, you can start to scale it in different directions. So I can go like that. I'll take the Y, scale that down, and then I can scale down in the Z-axis, and now we've got a much smaller rock. And if we run, let's go see, where is that thing? There it is. So it's still kind of big, but it's much more manageable maybe for what we wanted in our scene. Now, it kind of sucks that it's a floating rock. I don't know, maybe you want your game to have floating rocks. That might be kind of fun. But we can fix that because we don't need it way up in the sky. So if we look at our rock here, we can grab, so we can click on these little arrows. The yellow one's the active one. And so make sure you have this thing selected, your rock over here, and then also make sure that you have the crosshairs up here selected. So not the hand, but the crosshairs. And that'll give you the ability to move in one axis, which makes it really easy for positioning. So you can, drag any of the axes that you want and move it up and down. So if we move it down, see how it kind of falls below the terrain. And if we run now, let's see what we end up with. There it is. Now it's sort of buried in there. And maybe we want it right on the edge. So how do we, can kind of move it around to try to get it balanced, perfectly right on the terrain, or make it look however you want. And there's a way to do this that's a little bit nicer, and we'll work on that in a sec. But now we go up to it, and it's no longer floating. It's sort of just sitting there in our scene. And, again, here it is. Looks kind of weird. We can make it any size we want. If you look over on the right side of the screen in the inspector under transform, we see that the X scale is 0.16 and the Y and the Z are 0.3 something. And so that's why it's really skinny this way, because one of the dimensions is half of the other two. And so if we go from this side, it'll kind of look like a rectangle, or maybe a little bit of a circle, because we have our Y and our Z are the same, so that's there. And then when we come over here, the X is half, and so it's really skinny. And you can modify all those values all you want to make it, give it the shape that you want. All right, so the one thing I want to show you now is, it's nice that we have this rock here, and we positioned it by moving this up arrow. But what if we just wanted it to rest right on our ground, instead of us trying to, maybe we have to zoom in or that sort of stuff. What we can do is we can give this thing what's called a rigid body, and that will let gravity act on it. And so then gravity, simulated gravity, can just pull it right down to the ground, just like it's a regular rock. And so that's what we're going to do. And if you go over here on the right, there's an Add Component button. Make sure you've got your rock prefab selected. Go to Add Component, and we'll say Physics and Rigid Body. And notice what that gave us here. We have mass, and we're using gravity. We have all sorts of other things here. And so what that's basically going to do is there's always simulated gravity happening in our scene. And now that we've given this rock a rigid body, now the gravity can act on it, and it will respond to it. So if we run, it should fall down. Let's see what happens. Oh, did you see that? Let me move this up a little more. Watch what happens. So now the idea is that gravity is going to pull this rock all the way down. And if we go spin around here, there it goes. Oh, let's try it again. So watch for the rock, and it falls right down. And if you look over on the right in the inspector, notice I still have the rock prefab selected on the left in the hierarchy, and then on the right there's the position of our transform, and look at the Y value. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger in the negative direction, which means the rock is just constantly falling. And it's going to keep falling forever until it runs into something else. And that's not really what we want, because we want this thing to fall onto this grass and then just stop. But watch, let's see. There it is again. There it goes, and it falls right through. And the reason is that the mesh collider, which handles collisions, and this is a part of our rock prefab, we need to set this convex flag. We just need to check that. And we'll get into more details about what all of this stuff is later when we start building our own. But when we run it now with this convex object checked, then we can come over here and it should hit the ground, and there it is. And look, it even fell over. So if we run over there, here's our rock, and it has fallen over. So remember before it was really tall? Well, because we have gravity acting on it, it's not going to naturally balance that way. This is how gravity is going to make it fall and have it look like this. And let's watch it again. So it falls, and then it sort of falls over, because that's how it's going to balance. That's where all its mass is. And that's how that happens. So now we can start placing objects and let them rest right on the surface of our ground. And if you don't want that, if you want it to be sort of buried in it, then just don't give it a rigid body, and then drag it up and down however you want. So now we can do something kind of fun, which is sort of pointless as well, but we'll just do it for the sake of doing it. I'm going to select our rock prefab over here, and if I hit Control D or Command D, it's just going to make another copy of it. And then I can drag that new copy, and we're just going to make it rain rocks. No real reason, but that's okay. So I just keep duplicating and then positioning, and then I'm going to zoom out and duplicate, position, and then now if we run our game, our scene, we'll see it raining rocks. Oh, and they're crashing into each other. That was kind of cool. Let's watch that again. So here they come, all the way down, and all interacting with each other. And if we go up there, we can see how they're, leaning on each other. Hopefully, I haven't done this before, but maybe they're leaning on each other. Let's see. Yeah, so these things are kind of leaning on each other. Sometimes the colliders are a little bit off, where there might be a gap where there doesn't need to be one, but that's all right. So yeah, now we have a pile of rocks. Actually, we could even make a pile of rocks. Let's make a pile of rocks. Let's see what happens now. So what I did is I just duplicated that one rock. Oh man. They're flying all over the place. I think maybe I need to position them differently. So they were all crashing into each other as they were falling. Let's see, what about this one? What about this one? Yeah, you could just have a little bit of fun with it. And let's see what happens now. Anything different? Oh, here they all come. And yeah, so now we sort of have a pile of rocks happening over here. And it's kind of cool, we did all this without doing any coding, right? It's all just based on the physics engine and giving the properties to all of our objects in the scene so that the physics engine knows how to work with it. So that was the whole point of this little tutorial, was to show you how to bring in stuff from the asset store and maybe modify them a little bit, like we gave these guys some gravity by adding a rigid body, and then they can come into our scene a little bit more natural as opposed to trying to position everything ourselves. And I think that's really it. One more thing that I want to show you before we head out of here is if we go to File and Build Settings, this is going to tell us how we are actually building this game or this scene. And right now it's set for PC and Mac and Linux standalone, which means when we try to build this thing outside of Unity, so right now we can play around with this stuff inside of Unity, but at some point we want to be able to run it without Unity, so somebody without our Unity player or a Unity development environment would be able to see all of our awesome work. And so one way is if you have this clicked and you hit build, it's going to build either a Mac OS app or a Windows exe. That somebody could just double click on and run. But what we're going to do in this class mainly is use the web player. And I'm going to say switch platform down here, just so that I don't forget to do this later. So I've clicked web player and hit switch platform. And now when I click build, it's going to give me a name, and I could say rocks. And it's going to build us an HTML file that we can run through a web browser like Chrome. And if you haven't used it on your browser before, it's going to ask you to install a Unity plugin, but that's okay. Install it, and it'll work fine. And then now anybody with a web browser can experience this awesome scene that we've built. And here it is in rocks in this directory. Here's this HTML. So drag this rocks folder to your website and give somebody the URL so they can run this rocks.html. This Rocks Unity 3D will load in the background. You don't even really have to do anything, and then they'll be able to experience your world for themselves. And then if we run in here, again, really nothing's changed once we change that build setting. But now when we do a full build, it's going to go out to a HTML file along with a Unity package that people can just play with in their browser. So yeah, that was the idea behind this little show and tell here. Go to the asset store, modify the objects for gravity, position the objects, scaling the objects, and showing how we do builds for web. And that's all for this one.